First of all, I want to welcome you all to the latest edition of our Cyprus lecture series. It's really wonderful to see so many new people joining us in this Zoom forum. I can see a couple of people who've joined for some of the other lectures as well, but you're all very, very welcome. And I'll take the opportunity, as there are so many new people, to just say a few things about CBRL while I've got your attention. So CBRL is the Council for British Research in the Levant, and we exist to support and conduct and facilitate excellent research across humanities and social sciences across the Levant. And of course, we expand beyond those traditional geographic boundaries, and also beyond the remit of those disciplines. And in this modern world of academia, we want to be expanding and thinking about multidisciplinary research approaches and research arenas that absolutely go over modern. Am I muted? Can everyone hear me or not? I've just had a note that someone can't hear me. Can everyone else hear me? Barata, can you hear me? Okay, I think it might be you, because everyone else can hear me. Sorry. Hopefully you'll be able to sort out your audio. Thank you to those of you who've confirmed that I'm not talking to myself. Where was I? So yeah, CBRL exists to support all of this great research. Cyprus is part of our region, and we're all really enjoying learning more about the archaeology of Cyprus, the research that's going on there, and thinking about how this also relates to the broader region as a whole. So that's a bit about CBRL. Today is the fourth in our Cyprus lecture series, and we are delighted to be partnering with the Cyprus Institute for this series. As a lot of you probably know, the Cyprus Institute is a world-class research facility and a regional centre of excellence with a particularly strong focus on science and technology. And for this lecture series, we're bringing you some of the Cyprus Institute's foremost researchers to talk to us about some really, really fascinating themes. And these researchers are from the Science and Technology in Archaeology and Culture Research Centre. Which brings me on to today's speaker. We are delighted to introduce Mehmetcan Soyluoglu, which I've probably said terribly, but Mehmetcan is here to talk to us about research that he's been conducting in collaboration with another academic at the Cyprus Institute. But Mehmetcan will be leading the presentation today. He is a PhD student, but he's just been telling me he's going to defend his PhD this year, so we can all watch this space to see how well he does. He's been working on various archaeological research projects in Anatolia and in Cyprus, and has a particular interest on areas of archaeology, including Roman pottery, maritime archaeology, and dendrochronology. And today he is going to talk to us about dendroarchaeology and monastic heritage, unearthing the past at Sourp Magar in Cyprus. So I will hand over to you, and just to let everyone know, we are recording, so this presentation will be available online, and if you have any questions, do put them in the chat box or in the Q&A box, and I will try to get to them all at the end. So over to you, Mehmetcan.
All right, thank you very much for a very kind introduction, Jane. Just let me share the screen so I can start. Yeah, I hope everyone can see my presentation now.
We can.
So thank you very much also those who made today to come and listen this nice journey that I had during my research with Nicholas Bakirtsis so far on the Sourp Magar Monastery. It's a pleasure to be here today to share with you this fascinating story of this monastery and its significance within the cultural and natural landscape of the Kyrenia Range in Cyprus, which is an ongoing research project, as I said. So I must say thank you very much First of all, Dr. Nicholas Bakirtsis and also Stuart Manning and Britta Lawrence and other colleagues who have been helping me throughout this project. So whenever I start talking about the Sourp Magar, I usually like to begin to discuss about Sourp Magar with a quote from Henry Luke, a British colonial officer who took an early interest in the antiquities of Cyprus in the early 20th century. And in his guidebook, very much reminded me the bitter lemons of Cyprus from Lawrence Durrell, and he describes the monastery as follows. A mile below you is the one touch with the hand of a man has contributed to this idyll, an Armenian monastery of the 15th century, ensconced in a valley overlooking the sea. The grey walls of the ancient retreat, pierced by the narrow Gothic windows, are truly in keeping with Kyrenia. The description captures the essence of Sourp Magar, in my opinion, a monument that blends harmoniously with the cultural environment of the range through its aesthetic elements. And it might be still one of the best ways to understand and unreveal this convent by looking to the aesthetic features by first starting with its landscape. Therefore, it's important to consider the geographical and historical context of the Kyrenia Range, where the monastery is located, which effectively frame the history and archaeology of the Sourp Magar Monastery. The range could be easily described as one of the most strategic geographical formations of Cyprus, especially during the Byzantine and medieval period, also known as the mountain range of the Beşparmak in Turkish, Pentataklios in Greek, and the Five Fingers Mountains in English. The range runs along the northern coast of the island, and its surviving monuments preserve evidence of the both Byzantine and Latin efforts to control its natural passages, connecting the Messaria Plain and the capital Nicosia with the northern coast of the key port of Kyrenia, which gives the name of this range. The famous castle of Saint Hilarion, Kantara, and Bufavento remain central examples of the Crusader presence on the island, while remains of the Orthodox monasteries like the Virgin Absinthiotissa, Chrysantiphonidis, and St. John Chrysostomos echoes Byzantine investment in the range. In this context, revisiting the Byzantine legacy of the mountain range is a key significance to better understand aspect of continuity and change under Lusinian rule, which is the upcoming rule after the Byzantine era. The role of monasteries was a catalyst in securing Byzantine control, as these institutions supported fortification works and communication system of the visual control, while helping to maintain strong relationship with rural populations. The religious traditions established during the Byzantine period were deeply rooted in the ravines and slopes of the Kyrenia Range, and as such they remained an integral part of its cultural landscape through the Lusinian period. The persistent tradition and continuity of Orthodox monasteries reflect the complex networks of transition between Byzantine and later rule on Cyprus, caught in the midst of the political, economic, and cultural power struggle of the Crusades. This is the content framing, establishment, and growth of the Sourp Magar Monastery, actually. The prominence of the mountain range comes into play during the 7th century period, and the Arab raids, which significantly affected the island's political and economic landscape. Although recent scholarship has significantly revised the previously accepted concept of the so-called condominium, status of shared control between Byzantine and the Arabs, the actual administrative and economic network that sustained the island continue to be debated. New evidences shows the resilience and adaptability of the island in response to the shrinking ability to Byzantine state to exercise its rule over the southern territories. And it appears that as a result of Arab raids, the island ceased to function as a spatial entity under direct Byzantine rule, although the northern coast remained under the close watch of the Byzantine fleet based in Kyrenia. With the coastal region physically separated from the rest of the island by the range, Cyprus was essentially organized in zones of different, the north coast and closer the rest of the island, Byzantine administration. The control of the Kyrenia Range provided visual oversight of maritime activities to the north as well as early warning of any impending threats from the Messaria Plain to the south. It appears that as a result of Arab race, it's worth also mentioning that at least from the 10th century, the Kyrenia Range was settled by the Armenians and later Maronite community, a development which mirrors the efforts of populate to strengthening the key mountain range. In this context, it's necessary to ponder engagement of Byzantine authorities in the strategic position of such communities, as well as consider other ethnic or religious groups serving in this capacity. Following a well-practiced model of the defensive organization of the Byzantine Eastern Broadland, these populations become the akrites, derived from the Greek word akron, meaning edge, which guarded the important borderlines. And they were part of the sophisticated defense systems, which was further strengthened with fortifications. So coming to the Kyrenia, Kyrenia accommodated the needs of the imperial fleet. Its importance as the center of Byzantine authority in this period is attested by the remains of the strong fortification with an estimated date the 8th and 9th century. The significance of the Kyrenia Range was further emphasized after the return of the island to the Byzantine control in 965 during the reign of Nikephoros II Phocas. As a result of the following centuries saw significant Byzantine investment in the island, as the empire focused on the resistance and reinstating the power in the region. And in particular was the following periods was the growth was aiming to strengthening the Cyprus against the growing threat of the Seljuk in Asia Minor and the presence of the Latins and Levantine coast. In this sense, the island was a strategic outpost of Byzantine power in the region. The proliferation of the monastic foundation, sponsored by the prominent patrons and linked to the spiritual guidance of the influenced monastic leaders, is considered to be the strongest evidence of the Byzantine investment in the island. Monasteries, which served an array of economic, political, and cultural roles, facilitated the island's administration and overall strengthened the influence of the Byzantine over the local population, a relationship which proved to be particularly strong during the following centuries of the Latin rule, actually. During this period, the emergence of Nicosia as the island's capital further strengthened the critical importance of the Kyrenia Mountains. Three key mount fortresses, which you can see in the images, Saint Hilarion, Bufavento, and Cantora, served as a pivotal role in fortification network that secured the northern part of the island for Byzantine rule. They were key part of a line of defense that stretched along the northern coast of Cyprus and to include the fortified watching posts and towers, locally known as the vigles. Moreover, monasteries contributed to these networks, probably offering a control of passages as well as, importantly, water resources. Following the onset of the Latin rule over Cyprus from the 12th century onwards, the transition of the strategic mountain range to the Latin rule is particularly interesting, not only concerning the ways the new rulers of Cyprus built on and strengthened the existing fortification, but also how they responded to the socio-economic networks and cultural realities on the ground, which was a strong Byzantine presence so far. So first of all, before we move on, it's also important to note that the three castles were expanded and strengthened by the Lusinian rules of the island, and indicatively, it's worth taking a close look at the castle of Saint Hilarion. It's located almost at the center of the mountain range, occupying a steep rocky side, critical significance, as it guards the main natural passage, contains the Messaria Plain and northern coast of the port, especially Kyrenia. The name of the castle and the homonymous mountain peak point to the legacy of the ascetic named Hilarion, who presumably was active at the site. The complex spread along the southern slopes of the range, organized in three parts and levels of elevations, which in turn corresponds to three successive lines of defense. The lowest southern part is outlined by an extensive enclosure walls with the main south-facing gate. This was the area that accommodated the living quarters of the guard, stables, warehouses, and other auxiliary buildings. The middle level, occupying the eastern part of the fortress, was the main residential area of the castle, featuring an imposing Byzantine church dedicated to Saint Hilarion. At the peak of the mountain's ridge, the northwestern part of the fortress functions as a citadel and features a beautiful 2-3 story residence whose balconies and windows offer stunning views of the northern coast of the port of Kyrenia. It's important to highlight that the castle's church, with an estimated date between the end of the 11th and 12th century, the Byzantine church follows the octagonal dome church type, pointing to the Constantinople influence and the models. The combined with the locations and dedications to the legacy of hermit saint, and the castle must have previously been a Byzantine monastery, like the other establishments on the mountain range. The continuation of the use of Byzantine church inside the Lusinian castle provides an interesting context upon which we can probe the attitudes of the new rulers of Cyprus towards the sites connected to the Byzantine Orthodox cult, especially monasteries. Beyond their success and continuity at the level of the rural localities, such religious establishments continue the component of the defensive and socio-economic backbone of the mountain range. Of course, it is important to consider also the foundation of the Latin monastic institutions like the famous Bella Paes Abbey in the early years of the 13th century. Beyond its outstanding beauty, the lightly fortified Latin monastery commanded the broader area, providing the excellent visual control to the Kyrenia port. Its insertion in the landscape of Kyrenia Range and the possible replacement of an earlier Byzantine foundation reflects its importance considering its strategic proximity to Kyrenia. In the historical setting we put so far, it's important to place the foundation of the Sourp Magar Monastery in the historical context and to see its growth as an example of out of the several other monastic establishments on the Kyrenia Range. Sorry for the water. I just fly from Cyprus to London, so forgive me if I sometimes cut and drink water. So coming to the Sourp Magar Monastery. While the exact foundation date of the monastery remains uncertain, historical sources suggest with hesitation that it was originally established before 16th century as a Coptic monastery dedicated to Saint Macarius by the Coptic monks who settled on the island. The Coptic presence further confirmed by a group of Coptic manuscripts originated from the monastery. To give an example, Copt 28, as one of the listed monasteries coming from Cyprus, has an Armenian type binding, and their order doesn't follow the Coptic system. The case of Armenian binding and wrong order is suggested to relate to the close proximity of an Armenian village and has been used by the scholars as an evidence to indicate the transition of the monastery from Copts to Armenians over time. Of course, the transition is also evident in the material culture and in the way of calling the monastery as well. Once the monastery converted to an Armenian monastic institution, the patron saint of the monastery started to appear in the later documents as Sourp Magar Monastery, which is translation of the Saint Makarios. Sourp is saint and Magar is Makarios in Armenian. It's unclear whether Armenian community preserved the original dedication to Saint Makarios, but the continued use of the same name could be used to suggest that the transition was gradual rather than an abrupt reflection of continuity in monastic tradition. In this context, it's very important to understand the foundation and its transition period of the monastery, since the Sourp Magar could provide a unique case for that and could help us to better identify the change and continuity in the post-Byzantine Kyrenia range. Therefore, carefully dating each construction sections and the phases of the monastery is crucially important And this is the reason that dendroarchaeology stands as one of the most appropriate approach to such task. The study of wooden materials in Byzantine and medieval Cyprus has gained increasing importance, particularly for the chronological research in the past years. Tree-ring studies conducted in the Troodos region and Nicosia have provided valuable insights into both cultural and natural heritage, offering a new perspective on historical narratives. Despite wood being a primary material for the construction of the mountain monasteries in the Kyrenia Range, scholarly knowledge about the monasteries remains limited. These sites, along with their surrounding landscape, represent an understudied yet significant part of the Byzantine and medieval heritage. To better understand the long history of these mountain monasteries and assess the application of the dendroarchaeology, we turn to the scientific dating method. So, before we explore our research findings, let me briefly introduce you how this method works. The study of tree rings dates back to the early observations of the Theophrastus, the father of botany, when he recognized that tree growth patterns are late, when he recognized the tree growth patterns have a relation with the dates. And later centuries, Leonardo da Vinci even, who noted connections between the tree rings and environmental conditions. However, today, recognized method of tree ring research, dendrochronology, was formally developed in the early 20th century when astronomer Douglas discovered the cross-match of the tree ring patterns. Over time, archaeologists adapted this method to date ancient wooden structures with greater accuracy and still using it as a great deal of dating the archaeological context, as we do here at the Sourp Magar Monastery. Dendrochronology is like reading a tree autobiography, except it's written in rings instead of words. Each year, a tree adds a new ring to its trunk. The width of these rings depends on environmental conditions. For example, white rings indicate the favorable growing conditions, plenty of rain and warmth, while the narrow rings suggest the periods of drought, cold, and environmental stress. Now, if you imagine finding an old wooden beam in monastery, a shipwreck or a medieval house, by analyzing its tree ring and comparing them with the reference chronology from trees of known ages, we can determine the exact year that the tree was cut. And this helps to date structure, track trade routes sometimes, and even understand the past climate change. A great example, for example, in dendroarchaeology and refine our historical understanding in this case could be given from the Paphos Gate, one of the three medieval gates of the historic Nicosia. Initially, it was believed that the wooden doors of the gate were from a more recent period. However, our research demonstrated that the last ring we could reach from the door beams are not far from the construction of the Venetian period medieval walls and the gate. And by integrating the tree ring data with historical and archaeological evidence, we were able to conclude that the doors likely originated from the same construction phase. However, the wood was sourced by this, and also the wood was sourced from the Cyprus forest, the pine forest specifically. And at the end, it was a great opportunity to approach these long-standing historical wooden gate appropriately and have a knowledge on the forest use of the medieval Cyprus, as we could detect which woods were coming from which forest. So, turning back to the dendroarchaeology research at the Sourp Magar Monastery, I think also I should give a thank to the unique permission that the Technical Committee on Cultural Heritage, supported by EU and UNDP, provided this unique opportunity to sample, collect, and access this monument. With their permission, with their project, actually, dendrochronological work has been conducted under the umbrella of their restoration effort. So wood has been a fundamental building material in Sourp Magar Monastery throughout its history. Today, the surviving wooden elements provide the only remaining architectural evidence that can help us to reconstruct its past. The great opportunity here was to see wood almost every construction phase, which was creating a great chance to apply dendroarchaeological study on the monument. Due to restoration effort, many wooden elements at the Sourp Magar have been either relocated or left in place. To analyze them, we used two primary sampling techniques. One was coring, which you can see on the top of the image. So extracting a small core sample using a specialized drill designed for scientific tree ring analysis. And the other one was the cross-sectioning, taking small wood sample to obtain a representative cross-section of the tree rings. We also refined a minimally invasive technique during the fieldwork in Cyprus, but I guess that's a topic for another presentation, maybe in the future. So all collected samples during the fieldwork later were prepared and analyzed at the Cyprus Institute, Cyprus Dendroarchaeology Lab under the APAC labs. Based on our survey, dendroarchaeological findings were identified three major construction phases at the monastery. To start with closest one to today, the latest phase is visible in the eastern south wing, church and courtyard, where the 20th century renovation introduced a very familiar material to today, which is the modern concrete. But to have a closer look to its windows and its woods, our study of tool marks on the wooden beams, which is also part of the dendroarchaeological approach, showed an evidence of the electric sawmills, indicating that certain elements were added in the 20th century. You can see on the top of the image little lines going in a almost clear and consistent way. So these are the electric sawmill marks. And additionally, also Pinus sylvestris or Scotch pine in parts was used in this part of the monastery, and a species known to have been imported from Sweden during the mid-20th century to Cyprus. So here, without even cross-matching with rings, studying the wooden elements of the monastery thoroughly, which is also was enabling us to demonstrate and identify the latest reconstruction phases of the monastery. And as we move towards the earlier phases of the monastery, the east facade stands out with its pointed arch windows, supporting buttresses and stone masonry. The decorative windows closely resemble Crusader era architecture from Syria and Crusader revival from Bela Pais Monastery. So based on the similar examples from this period in Cyprus, the facade can be tentatively dated to the 15th century. And in the same part of the monastery, the wooden beams still bear tool marks from their original processing. So detailed scan of these beams help us to identify the tools used, revealing the hand-carved axe marks that show that they were shaped with traditional tools rather than modern saws. So what excited me even more was tracing similar hand axes in Cyprus in the early 20th century, particularly in the Troodos village, where they were used to make skafidas, which is a traditional wooden dough basins. So dating these tools could offer valuable insights into the continuity of the wooden traditions and techniques in Cyprus. And while our tree analyses are in their final phases to provide more precise dating, it can be confidently said that these tools marks were coming from the beams shaped during the medieval period, adding another historical layer to the monastery's context, and also the forestry history of Cyprus. And when we come to the last phase, which is the oldest surviving part of the monastery, are its heavy masonry stone rooms, likely used as a monk cells, and their solid construction preserving an early phase of the monastery's history. Ongoing analysis suggests that some of the wooden elements date back to the early Coptic presence of the island. This adds another layer understanding the role of the Copts as a newly emerging religious community under Latin rule and their presence in the Kyrenia Range, much like the Armenians and Maronites maybe in the Byzantine era. And confusion. I believe the research show now how deeply the Sourp Magar Monastery is connected with actually the Byzantine era and the Latin era, and also showing, for example, the Copts, who were probably coming from the Syria to Cyprus in 13th century, and when they were emerging their newly establishments in the island, they were also following this tradition that already set during the Byzantine period at the Kyrenia Mountains, like Armenians and Maronites, and starting their hermitage and then monasteries in this range like this. And it was a clue that we could have get through dendrochronology and through understanding the historical context of the Sourp Magar Monastery by identifying the different rooms and elements spread out the complex architectural plan of the monastery. So overall, I like to um, bring it in the conclusion that by studying wooden elements, I believe we have been able to trace forestry practices, construction techniques, and cultural shifts from the medieval period to the modern times. We have also gained new insights into how Coptic Armenian community moved and settled to the island. And as Henry Luke once called Sourp Magar the grey walls of ancient retreat, through our research, I want to believe that we have gone beyond these walls and explored the monastery's past through its people who shaped it and its place in the broader history of the Eastern Mediterranean. So thank you very much for listening and sharing this moment with me. And sorry for all the calls and everything.
Mehmetcan, thank you so much for sharing such a beautiful monument with us and a really fascinating case study. I found that absolutely brilliant. So thank you very much. And I can see various comments agreeing and sharing my thanks as well.